If you can be sure of anything in this life, be sure of this. Evil lurks in the land. At times, it seeps out into men, and when it does, it burns. In a holy book long ago, before even the time of the man Jesus, there were tales of such things. The first man to be born, Cain, and his ill life tell the story of man carrying sin well and darkly. Cain the farmer presented sacrifices to his God the Lord, as was right, and his younger brother Abel the shepherd also presented his sacrifices. The Lord looked upon both, but favored Abel's sacrifice before Cain's. Cain, angered, took Abel to a field and struck him down, murdering his own flesh and blood. The Lord came before Cain and asked, "Where is Abel, your brother?" Cain replies, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Unfooled, the Lord hears Abel's blood cry out from the soil and knows what Cain has done. The Lord then says to Cain, "Cursed shall you be by the soil that gaped with its mouth to take your brother's blood from your hand. Min ha-hadamah. If you till the soil, it will no longer give you strength. A restless wanderer shall you be on the earth." Cain, horrified, cries out against his punishment. He fears if he is to be cast out from his home and forced to wander, he will surely be killed by whoever finds him. The Lord hears this, and in his own special way marks Cain, disfiguring him so greatly that Cain would be known forevermore if he was seen. The Lord then says, "Whoever kills Cain shall suffer sevenfold vengeance." Thus Cain was banished from the land, and thus did he wander. From here, the story becomes legend, then myth, and then mystery. Some recent cults of the man Jesus even say someone, or something, still walks the nighted lands. Lands not too far from you, dear listener. Indeed, a letter from the 1800s recounts the night a tall, hairy being accompanied a Mormon apostle and traveler named Patton through the Tennessee countryside. The creature makes strange company, beckoning Patton to hear his tale of misery, to share his burden, and to please kill him. Fearing for his life and soul, Patton rebukes the being with words of his faith. Later, he recounted the creature's name was Cain. So now, listener, what if this beast came to you in the night? What if you defended yourself from it? What if in your struggle, you killed the beast? What if by doing so, by repeating the ancient murder that began this mystery, you took on the ancient sevenfold curse? What if you became the carrier? Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Magnificent Monsters, the series where I introduce you, the viewer, to things lost and almost forgotten. This installment concerns The Carrier, an 80s horror oddity about a small town, murders, Bigfoot, and a curse that turns everyday objects into terrible things that make people melt into thin air when they touch them. While this is an admittedly bizarre plot description, it is accurate. Many might hear it and immediately dismiss the movie as low-budget exploitation garbage, but surprisingly, The Carrier is a competent, well-shot, sometimes funny, and always interesting bit of cinematic candor. Yeah, the movie is about things like Bigfoot and plagues that melt people, but rather than succumb to being a silly affair or an exercise in splattering gore, The Carrier practices moderation in everything it does. And it's in doing that the movie achieves a nature that is special and worth seeing for more than just its wilder elements, in my opinion. Further, the movie demonstrates a solid and thoughtful examination on the themes of retribution, sin, loneliness, and the absurdity of life. Indeed, despite its strange elements, The Carrier ends up being more human and satisfying than many movies out there. And it's because of this and its many surprising connections to myth and movie making that I'm really just stoked to share The Carrier with you, the viewer, now. Our story begins in Sleepy Rock, a small town in what is presumably the backwoods of early 1960s America. We find Jake Spear, our main character, standing in darkness and peering into a dance at the town's church. Jake is a young man with a dark semblance, looking sick and confused. He is thoroughly an outsider, and the town wants little to do with him after recent events. It seems Jake's parents died in a fire that also consumed their homestead, and the townsfolk suspect a drunken Jake was more than accidentally responsible for the flames. Despite inheriting his parents' land and a valuable mine on their property from the fire, Jake is certainly not living it up. He spends his days herding the family's sheep, getting drunk, and discussing literature with hobos in a shack he hastily constructed on the Spear pasture, just below the burnt remains of his former home. How cheerful. He can sometimes be found skulking in the dark or being run out of town by the bullies who run things. One of his only friends in confidence is the young Treva. Treva appears to care for Jake and pleads with him to be careful and to take better care of himself. She is the opposite of the townsfolk in how she regards Jake. Indeed, Treva is one of those rare gifts in the life of an outsider, a reminder that every dark night can have a brighter dawn. After being thrown out of the dance, Treva and Jake walk into the night as a storm brews around them.
They don't understand. Why are you up there? It's just... you're so far away. Something might happen. You gotta get a place in town.
Treva pleads with Jake to move closer to town, closer back to humanity. She also warns him that the Black Thing, a mysterious creature, has been seen lurking in the fields around Jake's home. Jake denies that Black Thing exists, but before the two can finish their thoughts, lightning strikes down and destroys the only bridge into town, knocks out the power for the whole region, and finishes their conversation. Treva and Jake part ways, and Jake returns to his shack to reflect on all that's happened and been said that night. As the storm rages on outside his shack, Jake seeks comfort from his friend Jack D before turning in for the night. Suddenly, his wall collapses, and Jake is thrown from bed by none other than the Black Thing. The beast bellows and roars as it attacks Jake, landing a solid scratch across Jake's chest that leaves a mark. Despite the wound, Jake manages to surprise the beast with a lantern smash that sets the hairy monster ablaze. As the Black Thing flees into the stormy night, Jake grabs his shotgun and tags the Black Thing in the back. The thing emits one last screech and falls to the ground, melting into thin air. Overwhelmed, Jake also collapses, and the rain pours on. The next day, Jake stands above where the beast disintegrated, having no proof of the night's events besides a broken wall and a mark on his chest. He moves on and makes breakfast. He lights a pilot light, grabs a pan, and puts it on the stove. A spider leaps on the pan and bursts into smoke, burning up from the heat. Or did it? Jake notices the pan isn't hot. In fact, it wasn't even on the lit eye. How strange. Jake then rambles around town, stumbling and touching many objects while finding out he is still the unwanted outsider he was before. After more run-ins with the people who threw him out of the dance, he picks up his friend Jack D from the bar and returns home. There, he discusses life, literature, and loss with the town's veteran hobo, who appears to be Jake's only other friend in this story. In a show of appreciation, Jake hands the hobo some books he thinks the man will enjoy. After the two part ways, the hobo sits down to enjoy his bounty. He grips one fish, two fish, and screams as a burning begins. With the book still strangely attached to his arm, the hobo runs into town and collapses as horrified onlookers gather around and watch. The book is killing him, eating his arm. A quick-thinking bystander grabs a cleaver and severs the hobo's arm from his body. The townsfolk gather up the now one-fist but not yet dead fish hobo and take him to the local doctor, Anthony King. Dr. King asks what happened, and the townfolk can only reply,
I know this is gonna sound crazy, but a book was eating his hand.
Man, have you been drinking?
No!
This was done by a piece of machinery, a knife or a saw.
Well, yeah, I had to cut off his arm to stop the book.
Look, man, you're gonna pile on that crap that you had to cut off this man's arm because a book was eating it.
I just wasn't gonna sit there and let it eat him.
Oh!
Mystified by what has happened and unable to accept that a book was eating someone, the doctor travels into town. There, he passes through a crowd of praying townspeople who are gathered around the scene of the disturbance. Ever the scientist, the doctor has brought an animal with him to conduct a test on the mysterious book. Hoping to lead the town into an age of reason and enlightenment, the good doctor informs the crowd that this has all been a case of mass hysteria. As they look on, Dr. King meets Dr. Seuss and presses the test chick against the book. Sickeningly, the chick begins to bubble and sizzle. And, as it dissolves into nothing, the town of Sleepy Rock officially enters into a world where sanity is no longer a benefit, but a deadly risk. More tests are carried out, and Dr. King confirms that random objects are indeed melting anyone who touches them with their bare skin. Worse, the storm from before has knocked out the power and destroyed the bridge, the only way in and out of town. Panic explodes as the townspeople realize they are trapped. Starvation will set in soon, and if that doesn't get them, an invisible death that strikes if a single touch will get them, sooner rather than later. Gathering at a public meeting, Dr. King pleads with the angry and fearful crowds to remain calm. He lays out the rules of what is now called Sleepy Rock Syndrome. A single touch kills. Amputation can stop the melting if done early. Objects that are infected cannot infect other objects. Thus, he instructs everyone to dress themselves in layers of plastic or cloth to prevent accidentally touching any items that may be carrying the melting menace. Oh, and one more thing. Mark any items you find that are dangerous with the red cloth. The doctor then releases one last hypothesis.
Based on the location of the contaminated objects, I don't think this disease was spread by random air currents. I believe the disease was spread by a carrier, like a dog or a squirrel, or one of us.
Along with this revelation, the doctor emphasizes that if they are cautious and smart, they can escape the town and come out of this all right. All they have to do is work together to build an escape path from the ruins of the bridge. The town seems open to the idea of orderly escape, until the Reverend takes the stage and, to the doctor's horror, cautions everyone against leaving town. Instead, he calls to his flock to stay where they are, not give in to fear, and rejoice as they witness what he believes is a very upfront and personal display of power from the Lord. If they do as he says and stay put, he promises they will come out of the syndrome stronger for surviving what they have been tasked with. None of them can know when and if their salvation will actually be delivered. Nor can they know when the syndrome will strike next, or who the carrier is. And of course, what about Jake? All of these questions and problems play out superbly in the rest of The Carrier. I invite you to check it out if you haven't already. Now it's time for my spoiler warning, as I will discuss in brief what happens next in the movie, give my interpretation of events, and then tell you why I really like this movie and what I really think it's about. I can't wait to share all the cool facts I found in my research of the film. Alright, let's go. As the scientists suit up and plan for escape, and the religious begin to build their strongholds, and the existentialists accept whatever fate comes their way as they idle away their time in the relative safety of the bar. Life in Sleepy Rock devolves into a bitter, ugly thing as multiple people get all ate up by the syndrome. With the townsfolk thoroughly divided into 3 groups and 3 different outlooks on life, people can only come together on one point: don't get melted. Plastic and cloth armor is donned, surfaces are tested, and cursed objects are marked with red flags. Following the doctor's examples from before, and holy books from much farther back, the people realize it takes the sacrifice of life to test if objects and places are safe. Thus, cats become the most valuable object in town, as they can be carried easily for on-the-spot testing. Most days, the townspeople rove the countryside, capturing and gathering up all the barn cats they can find. Meanwhile, Jake puts 2 and 2 and 2 together and realizes he is, in fact, the carrier the doctor warned the town of. A prisoner in his own skin, Jake is seen by a young girl wandering in the woods as he fries squirrels and worms. Horrified by what she's seen, she flees, and Jake accidentally melts her while trying to assure her that he is not a monster. Good going, Jake. Jake's accident is seen by others, and after a brief chase, he barely manages to escape. Now the town knows the carrier is a man, and Jake decides he has no choice but to get the hell out of town. Jake talks to Treva about his plan and the pains of his past.
You gotta get out of here. I mean, I want you to get out of here with me.
He is suffering with the misery of first dealing with the mysterious death of his parents, and now the syndrome. He argues that they should escape the madness going on and just leave it all behind. Secretly, he seems convinced that if he leaves town, the curse will stay behind him. But perhaps selfishly, he doesn't want to go alone without Treva. Treva reveals to Jake that she knows he is the carrier. The two quarrel over should they stay or should they go, and if Jake is too dangerous to be around. Finally, ignoring the danger and demonstrating that kindness that so often goes unappreciated and even unnoticed by fools who don't know their own blessings, Treva embraces the carrier, who is still her Jake, their bond made, and their fate sealed. The two agree to flee town that night. Sleepy Rock is tossing and turning through a particularly vivid nightmare. This city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportions. Tensions are boiling between the religious Jones gang and the existentialist Black Sheep Tavern boys. Cats are becoming scarcer and scarcer, and the Black Sheep gang is squandering their supply of cats in drunken cat-tossing games, then fighting the religious and moderate Jones for their supply of cats. The fights over felines are escalating into theft, revenge killings, and chaos. Even children are being victimized by the madness, and it shows no signs of slowing down.
Hey! Get the hell up down there!
Overjoyed at being supported in his darkest hour, and by the idea of leaving the troubles and his curse behind, Jake goes to meet Treva in the church in town. While there, he sees lights and movements inside a building, and decides to eavesdrop. The furtive gathering turns out to be a parley between the religious Jones cult and the existentialist Tavern gang after the catastrophe, from earlier that day. The two groups are at the peak of their tensions, and the secret meeting is going poorly. The hooded leader of the Black Sheep Tavern gang attempts to mend the peace between the angry groups by reminding everyone that while they may be divided now by the syndrome, what they really wanted before all of this happened, that Spears family mine and all of its treasure is now unguarded and unprotected due to the chaos. Isn't that mine why they got Jake drunk, tied his parents to their bed, and burned the Spear house down, killing them and trying to blame it all on Jake? Horrified at this, Jake rushes to his former home and confirms what he overheard. There's rope on the bed. He realizes Sleepy Rock and its people were sick, even before the syndrome took hold of the town. His plans forgotten temporarily, Jake succumbs to rage and begins to plan on a revenge that now burns in him, and soon will burn others. Jake slips into the Black Sheep Tavern and tells the gang there that the Jones are preparing for war. They've created a fortress, hoarded cats, and plan on wiping out the Black Sheep gang in the first act of an all-out war. Jake, formerly the carrier, now the shepherd, expertly plays on the Black Sheep's mob mentality and herds them in a murderous rage towards the Jones fortress. Jake runs ahead of the crowd and informs the Jones that a raiding party is headed their way. The Jones prepare for war, gathering their infected and red-tagged death tools and strengthening their defenses. The two groups meet at the fortress and argue over what their true intentions are in all of this. The Jones demand the existentialist sheep accept the Lord and squander no more cats. The Black Sheep feel no Lord overlooks this madness and demand the Jones hand over their supply of cats. The shaky peace from the meeting before is gone. Now the demands from the Black Sheep are clear.
We got nothing to lose. Now give up the cats. Give up this madness. We have the Lord, weapons, and walls. You can't fight that. Is it cats or is it death? That's no choice. Cats or death. Get on the fence! Get on the fence! Hey, say your prayers. Right now!
And death it is. The gangs massacre each other. Meanwhile, Jake and Treva approach the doctor's home to speak with him. The doctor listens as Jake pleads with him to stop looking for the carrier, admitting that he is the cause of all the misery and turmoil, that he, Jake, is the carrier. The doctor wants to leave for the city with Jake and Treva, but fearing the townsfolk will suspect that Jake is the carrier once he disappears, Jake refuses to let the doctor come with them. Jake tells the doctor to help the people and forget about him. Suddenly, a scream peals from the darkness, and the doctor realizes something awful is going on. Ever the humanitarian, he rushes off to the Jones compound to help. Not wanting the doctor to get hurt, Jake takes a shortcut and discovers the grisly results of his revenge at the scene of the battle. He is caught up in the violence and knocked out. The doctor arrives soon after and is shocked by what he sees. With the Jones compound in flames, multiple people injured, and countless dead or melted, the doctor quells the madness by screaming that he knows who the carrier is. If everyone will kindly stop murdering each other, he will tell them who it is. The mob's calm at this sobering news, and the first battle in the war at Sleepy Rock ends. The next morning, the doctor tends to the injured Jake. He promises Jake and Treva that he will not reveal that Jake is the carrier. However, he's going to hold a meeting to tell everyone who the carrier is, and he insists that Jake must show up at that meeting, so there's no suspicions that he has fled out of guilt of actually being the carrier. The people gather at the church, and the doctor shrewdly casts the carrier blame on a low-down, ill-regarded outcast who also happens to be dead. With the news that the carrier is dead, he declares the syndrome is finished and all is well. The people rejoice, until an errant child walks over and touches Jake. As the toddler begins to wail in pain, the people realize the syndrome is still very much a threat. Seeing that Jake is holding the now melting child, they demand he reveal that he is the carrier.
We can save him!
Keep it up, Doctor! Murderer! Innocent!
Then touch the wall, Jake.
I'm not gonna take some stupid test.
If someone else has the disease, we'll isolate him! Isolate the carrier! Touch the wall, Jake!
You're crazy.
Touch the wall, Jake!
You're all crazy.
Touch the wall, Jake!
Listen to reason.
The jig is up and Jake flees. Like a lake to a man on fire, the guilty returns to the only safe place he knew before, home. Jake attempts to climb the cliff to escape the crowd. There, but for the grace of God, hangs Jake's spear at the place where it all started. The syndrome is over. And there you have The Carrier, a magnificent parable on the perils of sin, guilt, murder, and affliction, and Bigfoot and melting people. But anyway, I have begun to adore this movie, and I hope you feel similarly now that you've seen it. I think what I like most about this movie is how reserved and unexpected it is with its message, and how it delivers its hour and 48 minutes with weirdness and wit. The Carrier is firmly in the splatter, body horror, and body melt genres, a grouping of fiction that is populated by movies that, while not all awful, are definitely gross and definitely more wacky than serious, especially body melt movies. Contrary to most entries in that category of body melt, The Carrier is something of a diplomat for offbeat cinema. It allows almost anyone to enter into these sorts of movies without being too grossed out. Now, this is an achievement, especially when The Carrier is, while even being subdued, probably the weirdest of the body melt movies in terms of plot, substance, and performance. By all rights, anyone who hears the movie described for what it is, a Bigfoot attack, melting cats, Frankenstein story, will probably think it's a piece of bombastic, overwrought, and ultimately silly cheese. Yet it totally isn't that. There's a quiet charm to the movie that makes it unique and powerful, mostly for balancing the absurd with the thoughtful and beautiful. It's a nice surprise that all of this balance is accompanied by humor, style, and memorable dialogue.
Get ready to defend. Sharpen your weapons. You and you get the red objects and distribute them. You, and you guard the cats. Where's Bob?
Right here.
Get some men and grab the rear. Let's go!
The writing is also good, and while the plot can be hard to follow at some points due to meandering conversations, when the dialogue is good, it's great. I think everyone is going to remember,
Is it cats or is it death? That's no choice. Cats or death. Touch the wall, Jake!
amongst some other zingers that can really be appreciated if you pay close attention. Costuming is probably the best and most fun part of this movie for me. Every character is distinct, period accurate, and flashy in how they dress, especially Jake with his red getup. The hobo chic Mad Max gear everyone wears really gives the characters and overall movie a unique look and feel. My favorite character look would have to be the leader of the Black Sheep Gang, or as I call him, the Teenage Mutant Executioner Turtle. Also of note is the cinematography. Shots in the movie are interesting, well-lit, moody, and sometimes staggeringly gorgeous, especially the pastoral shots of the charming Manchester, Michigan farmland and woods that the movie was filmed at. This is attributable to the work of the director of photography, Peter Deming. You may know Peter from his work on the Evil Dead series, the Scream series, Mulholland Drive, Cabin in the Woods, and many other notable and soon-to-come films. Speaking of Evil Dead, the connection to the Carrier goes deeper yet. The music for the movie was composed by Joseph LaDuca, who is also the composer for all of the Evil Dead movies and Ash vs. the Evil Dead. The Carrier director and writer Nathan White is friends and contemporaries with Sam Raimi, the Evil Dead director, and I don't know, the responsible god? I don't know what you call that. And perhaps the strangest and funnest of Evil Dead facts, the black thing that attacks Jake in the movie. Yeah, that was voiced or screamed by none other than the man Bruce Campbell. I bet you didn't expect that. I mean, I sure didn't. Now, I have my own crazy theories on what the movie is really about in terms of story and message. And they are echoed in facts about what the director himself said in the commentary, and even where the movie was made. Now, excuse me, I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat. And yes, I really am putting on a tinfoil hat right now. The main message of the Carrier, as I see it, is that acts have effects, and those ripples can affect others, even if they are not immediately involved in what has happened. In short, no man is an island, and we're all in this together. If you hurt one of us, you end up hurting all of us, even yourself. In the Carrier, murder is the pivotal act I speak of. The effects of the murder of Jake's parents come back as the Syndrome, and they affect not just Jake, but the men who murdered his parents, and the townsfolk who stood by and let Jake be an outcast. Whether it is fair or unfair is up for interpretation. The fact is, the townspeople are suffering in a possibly indirect way, and none of them ever really did anything to find the truth of the matter out. Instead, they preferred to party, drink, gaze at themselves in the mirror, or lose themselves in other pursuits. If you pay attention to this, you'll start to see some math in what happens next. While the movie presents many possibilities about what the Syndrome really is, be it a scientific malady or a curse from God, I tend to see the biblical aspect of the Syndrome as the true interpretation, especially when considering how the melt manifests. This is a really Old Testament style curse. When the Syndrome strikes, take note of who it affects. While it first strikes down seemingly innocent life, like the spider and a drunk, things that don't seem to be part of the plot against Jake, they do serve as warnings of a sort to Jake and to those in the town. Everyone in town saw the book eating the man's arm. This is almost like a sign that something is seriously not right. Now, while some realize it may be a sign from God and pray and take up the vestiges of a religious life as the plague spreads, no one tries to atone for their sins. Not really.
Thanks, Jake. Hell, it's only for what you mean to me I'm doing this.
Some try to be a comfort to Jake, but they do not admit their sins. They simply become fearful and ward their religion like a defense, not a lesson in how to atone and be pure. Perhaps if they had reacted differently to the curse of Sleepy Rock, things would have gone different. Who can know what is going on, though? For those of you who need more evidence, let's break it down further. First, the Syndrome definitely targets a certain sort of person. Be it through circumstance, maybe some higher order of events, that sort of person is almost always the biblically sinful. The man who takes the book and becomes the first human victim is guilty of seeking higher knowledge, like Adam and Eve, in a darkly comedic, sardonic way. The woman who stares vainly at her reflection gets more than she wanted from her magic mirror. The children steal cats to use as cruel sacrifices. The people who attack the children are murderers. The two leaders of the gang, they're murderous liars, and they poetically kill each other. The guy on the toilet, well, I don't know, maybe he beat his wife before going to the bathroom, I don't know. Not all of them are gonna work. Okay, you might be thinking, maybe those folks deserved a good melting, but why does Jake get this treatment if he is the victim of a huge wrong himself? I'll get to that, don't worry. For more reasons to call this matter a curse from God, let's look at that very first mystical event that happens in the movie, the Black Thing's attack. It inarguably happened because the damaged shack and Jake's wound exists the very next day. We must consider it a real event to the story, not a dream, not a vision. And that's without even acknowledging the curse that follows. So, how do we reconcile a Bigfoot attack with a movie's supposed biblical message? Well, remember the intro to this video? If it's fuzzy, go back and rewatch it, and then let's meet back here. Hopefully you'll be on to what I'm about to say. One of my first feelings and thoughts when I saw the Bigfoot attack in the movie was that this creature that attacked Jake was not Bigfoot or a random monster, but Cain. Yes, the biblical one. It's crazy, I know, but consider these things. Biblically, murder is first carried out by Cain, who jealously strikes down his brother Abel after God favors his sacrifice over Cain's. After Cain murders Abel, he is marked with a curse by God that will make him known to those who see him. What this mark is never clearly defined. In history and visual art, Cain is described and later pictured as a rough-looking tough man who wears furs, almost like the modern popular image of a caveman. Cain's curse has been interpreted by some as having greatly disfigured him, to the point of turning him into a monster. In Beowulf, for instance, the absolutely bestial and terrifying Grendel and Grendel's mother are said to be descendants of Cain. In particular, Grendel is a creature of darkness, exiled from happiness and accursed of God, the destroyer and devourer of our humankind. Not very pleasant. This all leads me to think that the Black Thing, a giant, hairy monster, lines up perfectly with the myth of a monstrous Cain. Also, Cain is cast out of his land and forced to wander the countryside. Fearing for his life, Cain pleads with God for some protection, and God in turn adds on a bylaw to Cain's curse. If you murder Cain, you will be cursed too. Now, in some versions of the Bible, Cain finds a new home, settles, founds a nation of his own people, and dies. But in other beliefs stemming from Christianity, Cain is still out there, wandering around, causing mischief and begging people to end his miserable cursed life, at the risk of gaining his own curse many times over. So are you adding all this together in my crazy conspiracy yet? Here in this movie, we have this Black Thing that attacks Jake in the night, wounds him, then in turn is wrongly murdered by Jake as it flees. The very next morning, Jake is cursed himself. Fair or not, he did shoot the Black Thing when it was clearly running away, which counts as murder. If this is Cain, then we must remember that curse God laid out that was plain as day. Strike down Cain, and you too will be struck. As for why the beast, if it was Cain, attacked Jake, could it be that the past is repeating itself? Consider that Jake is a shepherd of sheep, just like Abel in the Bible was a shepherd. Abel had a somewhat easier job than his brother Cain, who toiled to make his bounty from the hard soil. Perhaps the big Black Thing had jealousy of Jake's easy life, just as the townsfolk were possibly jealous of Jake's potential wealth from the mine. Is that why the big Black Thing, if it was Cain, attacked Jake? Was mystic history repeating itself? While the director-writer of the movie did not mention the same connection exactly in the commentary, I think the similarities and coincidences are too numerous to ignore. I will say that the director-writer of The Carrier, when asked during the commentary what exactly the monster is, says he thinks the Black Thing is a manifestation of guilt, or that it represents the big black feeling of guilt. So my interpretation, wild as it is, does not clash much with the director's vision and is arguably a very religious movie. Further, stories of Cain being Bigfoot and causing mischief were being passed down through the Mormon faith for 100+ years at this point. In fact, these myths and associations with Bigfoot were most popular and starting to spread to the public right around when the movie was made in the 1980s. I have no proof that this is what the movie was going for, but an artist has to take what they're exposed to and make what they can, consciously or subconsciously. Correct? And maybe it wasn't so subconscious an inspiration. While researching Cain, I discovered that in Hebrew, the word Cain, spelled the same as it is in the Bible, means spear. Jake's last name in The Carrier?
Saw the Black Thing by the spear pass.
It's spear. Lastly, before I get off my Bigfoot jag, one strange but fun fact that I want to add is, as said before, the myth of Cain wandering the lands of America as a strange being was crafted by followers of the Mormon faith in the 1800s. In fact, the most famous tale, which I mentioned in the intro, was said to have happened to David W. Patton in 1835. Patton happened to spend some of his life in the woods near Dundee, Michigan, which, guess what, also happens to be just a few minutes away from Manchester, Michigan, where The Carrier was filmed. What a weird small world we live in, eh? So now here we have The Carrier, a low-budget, zany film about religious wars, plagues, melting cats, and killer Dr. Seuss books. It seems amazing to me that a movie with subjects like that was only shown briefly in 15 to 20 theaters nationwide after it was finished, is inspiring me to write 6,400 words. Maybe the magic to this movie is for the reasons I discussed, or maybe it's because it's the only movie with a cat wrangler listed in the credits. Like the plot, the reasons may remain a mystery, but you can be certain of one thing. The Carrier should not remain a movie you have not seen. You may sit down to watch this just to say that you've seen the Bigfoot attack / melting people / cat hoarder war cult movie, but you could also come away from it with more than you expected. It might just be that you're the next person to be touched by The Carrier. This is Toy reminding you that life sucks, but your movies don't have to.
Cats are death!